Here we are today on another episode of Planting Seeds. And this time, oh my gosh, I have the most amazing person joining me. Maggie, will you tell everybody who you are and what you do before we jump into this?
Okay, well, let's see. It's the end of September, so I am still technically the Chief Executive Officer of the Children's Development Academy, and I have a new book coming out called Humbled on Purpose, and I will be stepping down at the Children's Development Academy to talk about my book and promote high quality early education and talk about women in leadership and mental health and start the next chapter of my career. And before I ran a nonprofit, I was the president and chief operating officer at the Honey Baked Ham, which is kind of my story going from big company to nonprofit and that transition, finding more purpose in my work. So I'm kind of a hodgepodge of career persons.
Yes. And your book, Humbled on Purpose, which has my favorite title. I think the first time I heard it, I said, no, I should have thought of that one. It's so good. And I got to pre-read your book because I have privileges with
Yes, you do.
being a part of the Ripples Media company. And I was blown away, Maggie. It is so powerful. It is funny. It's heartbreaking. It's powerful. It's it's a fantastic book, and I cannot wait for you to get it. When does it come out? When's the
It
publication
comes
date?
out, well, it's available for pre-sale on Kindle right now. Hardback pre-sale is next Wednesday, and paperback resale goes out on October 5th.
Okay, got it. Well, in the show notes, I'll make sure that there's a link for people to go. You're going to want a copy of this on ebook, and you're going to want one in your hands too. So hopefully people do both. Just for a moment, let's talk about the process of writing it. Had you always wanted to write a book? How did this happen?
Well, I'll have to say that you're a big part of this. I was ready to retire. I was playing on 5 tennis teams and ready to just like sail or rather lob my way into retirement. When I went on a retreat to the Canyon Ranch with one of my besties, Joanne Harold, and she had just written Living on a Smile with Ripples Media, and she was coaching and speaking and consulting and doing all kinds of fun things that actually seemed like even more fun than playing on 5 tennis teams. So when we got to talking about it, and she was talking about how everybody always wants to write a book, but very few people actually do write a book. And she was telling me about how you guys had this accountability text chain and you write a book on a Google Doc, and she did it in 6 months. And I should talk to her editor, Andrew Vogel. And so we came back from the Canyon Ranch about this time last year, and she put me in touch with Ripples Media and Andrew. And in less than a year, I went from talking to the editor, signing the book deal, coming up with the outline, writing it, and it will be almost exactly a year from talking to Ripples to taking the book to market. And it's a dream I have had, but didn't really speak out loud until talking to Andrew.
Yeah, that's awesome. And shout out to Joanne Harold, of course. Joanne's
Right.
everybody's favorite. Everybody who knows Joanne, she's the favorite.
Yes.
And her book is great as well. Humbled on Purpose. What does that mean?
So when you are the leader of a for-profit company, there's a certain amount of privilege and specialness and ease. It's a hard job, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of days where results and your board and things make you humble, but there's not much. You get a big paycheck and a lot of specialness that goes with it. But when you voluntarily step down, take an 86% pay cut and give up all the accoutrements, there's a certain amount of humbling that goes with it. There's not a lot of staff. There's not a lot of perks that go with it. And so I really did decide to take a humbler path. and do this passion role. And I don't know, you know what, that might not be true. I might not have decided, God might have decided it for me, but I listened at least. And I learned so much, and it's really been the best 8 years. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I wanted to kind of, while it was fresh, impart some of those lessons in what I've learned to people, whether they're young and trying to find passion and purpose in their career, or they're looking for a more significant way to find meaning in what they're doing. You don't have to go to work for a nonprofit to find meaning in your work. There's lots of different ways to do that. And I talk about some of those different things in different chapters of the book.
Yeah. And I, going through your story in the book, I absolutely got a sense of the way that you mentored and worked with your team members. And, you were so honest in the book, and we're going to talk about some of those stories you tell, but your ability to reflect back and say, gosh, I wasn't the best person to work for during that period. And, but then you learn from that. And ultimately, I think it sounded like by the time you got to Honey Baked, you had become sort of this more fully finished version of your corporate self, and you were doing a much better job with your team. But there's meaning in that, right? There's meaning in helping others achieve their best.
Oh gosh.
In corporate America.
Even going from the frontline sales floor at Macy's into the HR department, you get to be a little softer version of yourself. And I think if I had stayed on the merchandise buyer path at Macy's, I don't think I would have liked that version of myself. I don't think I would be writing this book. That's for sure.
There you go. One of the things that there were so many parts of your book that I was just like head nodding, like, my gosh, I've said this before. This is exactly what I believe. One of them, which we've talked about, is the idea that the name nonprofit is about the worst name you could give to those companies that are exist to help other people, right?
Right. The absolute. In fact, Andrew and I first toyed with calling the book all profit and crossing out non, but the execution of it was so challenging. Because all profit from everything that the nonprofit industry does. And if I had any clout at all, I would have worked harder to rename it, because, whether you're the stakeholder or the people who work in it, or even the people who give to it, you profit so much. Everybody does, but they call it nonprofits for some reason that I it's what you do with the dividends. There are no dividends to be distributed, therefore nobody profits, which is such a misnomer that drives me crazy.
Well, and my take, I love all profit though. That's also maybe better, but to me, I've wanted to call them, instead of you have for profits and nonprofits, I want to call them for purpose. So
I like that.
That's why they exist, for this bigger purpose. But gosh, all profits, pretty good.
We should go into a naming agency.
We should. Okay. I want to talk about some of the things, you didn't have the easiest life, certainly as a young person. And your mother died before you were 1. And then I believe your father ended up dying on Christmas Eve.
When I was 17, right?
When you were 17.
Yes.
And he was an alcoholic.
Yes, highly functional, but highly mean when drunk, alcoholic. And I didn't realize how my mother died when I was a baby. And I discovered that when I was 13, that she had taken her own life, which was another traumatic event for me to discover that she had. And they had kept it from me, which kind of made me believe that they kept it from me because it was my fault. So I kind of went on this path of feeling like I needed to get my own, deserve my own place on the earth, and kind of prove to the world that the right person was left behind. And because I felt like, well, if she hadn't had me, she wouldn't have had a nervous breakdown. She wouldn't have had a colicky baby. Maybe my older brother and sister would still have their mom. And then when my dad died, I kind of doubled down on, well, I'll just show this world that they can't do anything that I don't control. So, you know, in this whole don't call little girls bossy world, I was definitely had a lot of characteristics that people don't necessarily like in young ladies, but there's some killer executive training skills. So I was not a great early manager to work for. I was a perfectionist for myself and others, but I was just trying to control a world that had been pretty tough on me.
Yeah.
Pretty tough on me.
And working an insane amount. You know,
yes.
It's
hard to control things if you don't work all the time.
There you go. I've had conversations with other female leaders on my podcast, and this sort of rings true for pretty much every successful female leader I know, which is they work so hard and so much, more so than certainly their male counterparts, but also I would say more so than is needed. But because of what they've had to do to get to that point, and the walls they've had to break through.
Right.
And I know that's a big part of sort of what, as you've reflected back on your career and what you want to do here after you leave the CDA, is speak to women leaders. And so that's a resounding theme throughout your book. There's a quote here that I want to read back. It's when you're talking about at Macy's and you learn to speak up. And so you write, waiting for others to see you doing hard work and promoting you because you deserve it is a bad plan. You must advocate for yourself, or you will toil with your nose to the grindstone until you are resentful and burnt out. And I don't recall if you wrote that I can't remember if you wrote that just to all people, but I would say that's specifically for female leaders. Men are very happy to go, look what I've done. It doesn't, and ask for the raise. And women sometimes aren't.
Yes. It's hard to believe that the book Lean In is 14 years old, because that was such an epiphany for me. But studies show that men will apply for a job if they've got 60% of the qualifications. But if a woman doesn't have 100%, they won't even raise their hand. So women and I know I was guilty of this early in my career. I just thought because I was doing the best job as the sales manager, that when it was time for somebody to be promoted, they would look around the store and say, oh, Maggie's doing the best job. Maggie should get promoted. But that's not even good human nature. If I'm the store manager and I look around and say, who's doing the best job? Who is the person I least want to give up? Well, it's Maggie. So I might be more likely to give up somebody who's not doing the best job, or maybe somebody who's doing an okay job. So when a couple people got promoted ahead of me, I marched down there and quit with nowhere to go. And he luckily didn't laugh out loud at me, but he's like, why in God's green earth would you think I would give you up? And well, because I'm your best person. And he walked me through this. Well, if you want to get promoted, you need to speak up for yourself. And it was a lesson that served me very well, because there were many, many times I put it into play, and I've told people about the importance of advocating for yourself, and working long and hard is not the key to getting noticed.
Yeah. And I really appreciated this about what you said in the book. You do advocate for young people to put in the time. When you're young, that's your time,
Yes.
Do the hard work, put in the extra, a little bit extra, but you got to work hard. I think a lot of young people today, maybe don't feel like that's part of the process, but I think it still is, right?
Yes, there is that time. I was talking to somebody in the past year or two who was telling me that they were reading their reviews on Open Door Glassdoor. Yes. And, oh gosh, it's got a really tough culture. And I just laughed out loud, because there's no 40-hour work week your first few years. Right. And you know what, when they ask you to work extra, say thank you, because you get to learn more and do more. And that means they've seen something in you, and it's just an opportunity. And people need to understand that you still have to pay some dues, but it's a great opportunity to learn more and get ahead. And so I I think that that's an important thing that people need to understand about those first few years in the workforce. It's still a time to put in a little extra and demonstrate your work ethic. It's your first opportunity to make a great impression in your career. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Again, I love that you said both of those things. You said, look, don't just work hard. You need to advocate for yourself. But when you're young, you kind of got to work hard as well.
Yes, yes.
You always have to work hard.
But don't get burnt out.
That's right.
But do work hard.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've appreciated about knowing you, but also I think I know, I don't know, the new you. And so as I read the stories, one of the things that stood out to me was that you speak your mind quite a bit. And so there's two of your, I think you got advice from two bosses. So what I have here is you had your boss and mentor, Mark, said at one point, he said, you know, Maggie, just because something is true doesn't mean you have to say it out loud, which I just love. And then Chuck said at one point, Chuck was the Honey Baked CEO, correct?
Yes.
He said, perhaps that should have remained a private thought.
Yes. Yes.
So good. So my question for you is, are you better at that now?
Slightly, moderately, marginally. Some people would probably say no, but maybe they didn't know me when. They don't know from where I started. But honest to God, when Mark Ahrensmeyer told me that just because something was true didn't mean that I had to say it, that was like a light bulb moment, because I'm from the Midwest. People are just very direct there. And I literally thought if something was true, it was okay to be said, because the truth was the ultimate defense. And the idea that, you know, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything, that was not like that's more of a Southern thing, and the bless your heart. And it took me a long time, because when I moved from the Midwest to the South, I did not learn the bless your heart and the add extra words to soften things right off. Yep. And to this day, I still have to kind of write an email and then go back and add the fluff and the softening, and to make sure you have to, you know, say it in a way that people hear it. But, and then, you know, Chuck was a great one at making sure that it doesn't matter if you feel like you said it, it's if they've heard it. And so it's not important what you said, it's important what they heard. And if you have to add 97 more words for them to hear it, then you add the 97 more words. So yeah, I'm still more direct than I'd like to be, but I'm far less direct than I used to be. So.
Yeah, you probably pick your moments a little bit better, maybe.
I think so. And I use a lot of humor to try and get points across. You know, Joanne and I are both a little guilty of using sarcasm every now and then. One of my favorite, you know, Native American sentences is many truths are told in humor. So, you know, people who work with me know that sometimes I'll tell a joke and they'll be like, oh, I need to listen to what she just said about that. But yeah, I'd rather make a joke than write somebody off any day. So
yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you talk about, and I never heard this phrase before, but I love it, is scar-based leadership.
Yeah.
And I have a passage here. So you say, when people understand your message, especially if that includes scars, warts, and imperfections, it frees them to be more real as well. In this photoshopped, staged, and highly contoured world, people are craving authenticity. Reality television is anything but real, but realism in the workforce and relationships and in dialogues accelerate trust building. Scar-based leadership is the key to creating real relationships in work and life. My goodness, that's it. Like, you need to, by the way, when the book comes out, like that needs to be a paragraph you put on LinkedIn. I mean, that's freaking fantastic. Can you talk about when and how you started to learn to share more of those warts and all?
Yes. So at Honey Baked, I was in HR, and it was kind of, it was easier to be that nurturing Maggie. And then when my youngest son, Brady, went into kindergarten, Chuck had been wanting me to take over the stores. I had a big retail background for a while, and we kind of agreed that once Brady started school, because we both knew I was going to lean into my workaholism.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and we started doing store visits and leadership inspections at the holidays. And I was not the warm, nurturing Maggie from HR that people were necessarily expecting. And I was, doing forced rankings and things that came with my retail background. So after maybe a couple years of my team kind of not really loving the operational Maggie, we had a conference at Lake Oconee, and I took the opportunity to kind of tell them my story about why I am. They already knew I was a kind of a controlling, detail-oriented, high expectation leader, but they didn't know why. They didn't know I lost my mom when I was a year old, and I found out that she hung herself from reading her obituary when I was 13, and that my dad died when we went to wake him up to open up presents on Christmas Eve, and that I've just been trying to control the world since I was a very little girl, and that I'm always working on it, but that I'm a broken person, and that I know that about myself, and that I appreciate their patience, and that I know they too aren't perfect, but let's try and look for the best in each other and work on it together. And oh my goodness, being real and authentic and vulnerable is so much easier and trust building than trying to appear to be perfect. And when I got off the stage that day, there was literally a line of managers waiting to tell me how much they appreciated it, what their scars were, and just start having dialogue. And every time I did store visits after that, we started at a further place in our relationship, because I wasn't pretending to be perfect. They didn't have to pretend to be perfect. And so I really do believe that the sooner you can tell someone what a mess you are, the sooner they can let down their guard too, and you can just be real and have real dialogue, and trust grows and relationships grow. Our business results grew faster because of, I think, that dialogue. And I know when I went back and talked to Chuck about it, he's like, they needed that, you needed that. That was leadership. And a lot of people were like, I could never have done that, but it needed to be done. It wasn't particularly hard, and it's been very, very effective. And it's something I think I need to do more, in part because I have maybe a tougher veneer sometimes, and because people expect women to be one way. And so you have to work a little bit harder at being authentic, I've found. But so I think scar-based leadership is really important. Call it what you will, authenticity, vulnerability. But I think leading with your scars and your warts is very important in this day and age.
Yeah, agreed. It's so powerful. It's one of the things that, like Patrick Lencioni in his books, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, he talks about you've got to be vulnerable and you've got to share those stories. So I also loved that part of the story where I think you were doing your test run, and then afterwards the people working there started putting tissues on the table because they had heard it. And they were so moved that there were tears. So they said, people are going to want to have these at the tables.
I think they just didn't want their white napkins at the Ritz to be messed up. But yes, it was very
Either
sweet.
way, they were like, this is going to be, that was very powerful. Switching gears to something a little less serious, but actually another really great leadership lesson. I loved it when you talked about how, and it might've been Honey Baked, I can't remember which company, but or maybe it was at CDA, but when it's probably CDA, there's all these ideas that people have all the time. And so they're constantly throwing, and you're trying to focus the team. And ultimately you made them say, instead of we should do this, we should do this.
Mhm.
They had to say, I would be willing to.
Yes.
And that just reframes it all. So can you talk about that for a moment?
So we have a great board, a volunteer board, all business community leaders. We have a board that a lot of people want to serve on, but these are high-powered executives that don't want to waste their time every other Tuesday morning at 7:30 when they come in. And so they've got great ideas. And we do a strategic offsite every year where we refresh our strategic plan and we come up with what we think we're going to do for the next 3 years. So when somebody goes to another gala or, sees somebody else doing something else, it's very enticing for them to come in and say, oh, so-and-so did this, we should. Well, that can lead you down another path. And the one thing that I have learned so fast at running a nonprofit is that the key to you have to be more strategic than ever, because you have to say no to more. Mm-hmm. So we learned very quickly that if somebody comes in and has a great idea and wants to say, I'd be willing to lead this initiative that's great, because they're going to drive it, they're going to lead it. But anybody who comes in and says we should, well, that just gets parking lotted until the next strategic plan, because we should is nobody will, but I will, then that might have some energy around it. And that's worked really well. And in fact, I too have been guilty of, maybe we should, and they'll be the first one to get the hook out and pull me off my own, with my own rule. So it's a good guideline. I highly recommend it, especially to nonprofits.
Yeah, no, I think it's fantastic. So another thing you talk about in your journey is going from corporate hard charging, and where and how you grew up to then running a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. And you talk about how being around those children and those families really started to change your heart and how you view the world.
Yes.
One of my favorite leaders here in Atlanta, Terrence Lester, he uses the phrase proximity changes everything. And he talks about that a lot in terms of people experiencing homelessness and people that are, not as well off, and spending time with them or around them will help open your heart. And I found that to be the case always. The more time I spend with people different than me, and especially this summer, I got to go on a mission trip down to the Texas border, meet some of the families or people coming across. And so suddenly you start to see the world differently. So can you talk about that experience and that change as you began running the CDA?
So when I was at Michigan, I was a Mondale liberal. I campaigned for Walter Mondale. And they say, if you're not a liberal at 20, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative by 50, you have no head. And then, you start paying taxes and you get this different mentality and you live up in the suburbs, and you just I kind of tuned out, I guess. And I, thought of myself as kind of a compassionate conservative. And I gave generously to causes, and I wouldn't say I had a hardened heart, but I had certain opinions about things. And then proximity does change everything. My job is in the Groveway of Atlanta, or Roswell, where there's Section 8 housing. It's one of the few places in North Fulton County where there is Section 8 housing. And I would, come into work, and there would be a homeless person using our plug, and his back would be to the wall for warmth and safety. And I would soon learn that person's story. And it wasn't because they made bad decisions in their life. Lots of Americans are one paycheck away, one lost job, one medical incident away from a crisis. And our families are not in our school, I run a nonprofit that provides high quality early education to families who couldn't afford it otherwise. And they're not there because they made a bad decision. A lot of them are immigrants and they work really, really hard. But oh my goodness, high quality early education is $450 a week for one child. You know, if you've got a couple, that's a mortgage. That it's just untenable for families. So you quickly learn that poverty is not a life choice, and your heart softens and you realize that some of your beliefs were not founded on anything really. And so I guess I'm kind of a voluntary socialist now. I've always believed in Luke 12:48, to whom much is given, much is expected. And I have higher expectations for myself now in terms of giving and what people should do. I don't think that nonprofits are enough of a safety net for America. I feel like healthcare is not just an American right, it's a global right. You know, shouldn't everybody have clean drinking water and food? Shouldn't everybody across the world? I came back from a mission trip this summer in Honduras, and you know, we went to an orphanage, and those children were the lucky children in Honduras. You know, I wish every child in Honduras could live like the orphans at the Lamb Institute. And so, yes, I feel like the Grinch. My heart has grown 8 sizes. And, you know, I just wish I could do more. I wish I could do. And it's funny, I make so much less than I used to make, but we give a higher percentage of what we used to give. And the only regret I have over the last 8 years is that if I made more, I could give a lot more to causes that, you know, we're generous. We like to be generous with. So it's just, there's so much need, yet we're so wealthy. I wrote a blog post about, after going to Honduras, that, you know, sorry, boys, I lied. We are rich. You know, I always tell my boys we're comfortable. No, we're rich. We're just plain rich. Compared to the world, we're just plain rich. So.
Yeah. Well, that was beautiful, sort of reading about your journey, you know, getting back to that place and how your heart was touched. One of the final things I wanted to ask you about is, again, one of those moments where I read it and I'm like, we're like soulmates or something, like we're speaking the same language here. So you write in one of your final chapters, nobody should feel that they have to go into nonprofit work to find meaningful work or joy in their daily life. And what I've started with Purpose Group is a holding company in which we're buying really blue collar businesses and we're helping them find their purpose, and we're helping them put culture into these businesses so that those folks can have pride in their work and be excited to come to work and find meaning in their work. And so one company at a time will do that. But then the bigger idea is like the ripple effect from that, right? Like it's very important. I like to talk about business being a force for good, but I now say a profitable force for good, because so many people think it's one or the other. You got to do a nonprofit or you got to work your ass off. There, you know, you can't focus on the fight. You can't do both. And I feel like you can do both. So when you say that, like, how do you think about that for people in corporate or in a, you know, a for-profit job? How can they find meaning or joy in their career?
Well, for one thing, it's always starting with the people. Mentoring and giving back and growing others is joy-filled and making a difference in other people's lives. The other thing is, you know, finding that community group within the impact organization within your company, and if they don't have one, create one or do it yourself. Make your department do a toy drive, you know, raise money, do a food drive. It doesn't take an act of a board of directors to give back to your community. Nobody's going to stop you from putting a box out in the hall and giving back to your community. But I think it always start with your customers, start with your internal customers, and make your work be about giving back to people and your community. And it's always going to be about more than the bottom line, and it's makes you want to get out of bed in the morning,
Right.
and that's the joy of it.
And the beauty of what you just said is, if you do those things, if you start your own initiative at work and bring people along, it's only going to help your career. You're not doing it for that reason, but I mean, my goodness, like, you're making more relationships at work. You're showing leadership and initiative. Like, it's a win across the board.
Yep. They'll be like, oh, who did that? Oh, I
Yeah.
want to meet that person. Yes.
Yeah. And the CEO walks by and is like, oh, I'll donate to that. Who put this together?
Yeah.
So, okay, here's a question for you. What advice would you give your 22, 23-year-old self now that you're on this end of the journey? Like, is there anything, or would you just say, let her ride, let her learn her lessons to get to where you are now? Is there anything you would tell her?
You know, I really think everything happens for a reason, and God's plan is perfect and his timing is right. So there are some things I wish I'd gone back and gotten my advanced degree, but every time I did, all the people were there to get to the job I already had. So I'm like, I'm traveling so much. Do I really want to do that? But I do tell young people that get it while you're young. And, but you know, I would, smell the roses a little bit more. Don't work so hard. Nobody ever wishes they worked harder when they died. But that would probably be my only advice, because every mistake I made, everything I did wrong, I learned from and became better for it. So no regrets. No regrets.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. As long as you're learning from it, you got the scars, you learn from it, you keep moving forward. Why should people read your book?
Oh gosh. I hope people read my book because it might help somebody. And I don't know if it might be them or it might be the person they pass it on to. I hope that people don't buy my book and put it on the bookshelf. I hope people buy my book, read it, and pass it on, because there's a lot of different themes in there, from mental health to work life to infertility and workaholism. And, I hope my book is one that gets passed to person to person to person, rather than collecting dust. And so I just hope that people will read it, because there's lessons in there for lots of different groups of people. And there might be nuggets in there for whoever reads it.
Yeah, well, I certainly am a massive fan of it. As I said, I think I told you early on at Ripples, I did a read through before books went out, mostly because I wanted to make sure I did that, but also because I was kind of one of the final editors, just like trying to find any little thing. And Andrew Vogel, and I don't do that anymore. We have too many authors, and that's a great quality problem to have. So but Andrew said, Jeff, you've got to read Maggie's book. And so I read it. I read it so quickly. I couldn't put it down. I loved it so much. And I'm not just saying that. It is wonderful. So we're going to do our best to get the word out and get this in people's hands. I do know that people can book you for speaking to come talk to any number of groups.
Love that. Thank you.
I think that would be terrific. I have one final silly question, if I can ask it to you.
Oh, please.
You ready? Okay.
Ready.
How many owls would you need to see in a day for you to become concerned?
Over 500, because owls are my sorority mascot, and I have seen a lot of owls on a regular basis.
Wait a minute.
I love owls.
Yeah, but all right. So if you, 500.
Sorry.
Most people say 3 or 4.
Oh, I'm sorry. I love owls.
Should I real owls, not just like on a monogram or something?
Oh, real owls.
Yeah, like owls out of.
Okay, yeah. I would. Oh, all right. More than 5. I would say 5. Otherwise, 5? I would say it's like a thing from God.
Sure. Yeah. Right. You said 500.
I thought you meant just owls around the house.
No, I
have lots of owls.
You have lots of owls around the house. Okay, good.
Sorry, Jeff.
Hey, listen, it's always a good answer when I ask that question. Maggie, I'm so thrilled that you're a part of Ripples. I'm so thrilled to be in your orbit. I think this is exciting.
Thank you for helping make my dream come true of writing and publishing a book, Jeff.
I'm happy to be a tiny part of it, but man, this is a great book. I will see you Friday, and
yes.
we're gonna celebrate. Thanks for joining me. It was really great to see you.
Thanks, Jeff.